I was in my 18th year, I was a bold young rover, and to the army I did go for to roam the world all over. I was a soldier stout and bold, I never once was wounded, till I fell in love with a pretty fair maid, and she has me sorely wounded. Fa-la-da-da-da-da-da-day, and a fa-la-da-da-da-day, oh. Fa-la-da-da-da-da-da-day, and a fa-la-da-da-da-day, oh. Hey friends, welcome to Traditional Songs for the month of November. I hope you all had a very happy Thanksgiving. Some of you might have recognized that little snippet that I played. It is from a really neat little song called Bold Young Rover, and it is the opening track on my album, which hopefully you all have checked out. The album's called If I Were a Small Bird, and you can find the link to that all over my Facebook and website and all of that stuff if you haven't already. So I wanted to talk about how I discovered this song, how I found it, and how, in particular, I adapted it and sort of changed certain elements of it to suit my purposes and to suit the style of my album. So this song is unique on the album because it has never been recorded before in, on a modern CD or record or something like that, as far as I can tell. So I searched up and down the internet, could not find any other versions of the song. So as far as I know, this is the only version of the song circulating out there today. And so you might be wondering, how, in fact, did I come across this song? So let me explain how I came across the song, and then we'll actually get into the specifics of the piece. So the album is themed around war and loss. So, of course, those two themes are intertwined, and they often produce rather sad songs because war is just a very tragic event. So most of the songs that I had accumulated were what you would think of as being kind of laments or ballads, very of the slower type. But I really didn't want the album to be too tragic in tone, and that can just get a little bit draining on the ears. So I wanted to find an up-tempo number or two, and one of the up-tempo songs I found was Mrs. McGraw, which is the last track of the album, but I needed one more. And so I turned to a really cool resource that I have that I would recommend to those of you who are interested in traditional song. I presume that's why you're watching this video. This is a really massive anthology, and believe it or not, this is only volume 1 of said anthology. It's called the Grieg Duncan Folk Song Collection. So Grieg and Duncan were two folklorists and scholars at the turn of the previous century, so end of the 19th into the 20th century, and they collected folk songs in the area of Aberdeen, so Aberdeenshire, Scotland. So you've probably watched my other videos about this topic, but in case you don't already know, when somebody talks about collecting songs, what that means is that the song collector went to the towns, the villages, the countryside, or whatever, and found individuals that said, I have a song to sing, and they would either, before the age of recording technology, the song collector would actually write out the melody of the song that person sang and the lyrics. Sometimes they would only collect the lyrics, which is unfortunate. But thankfully, with our pals Grieg and Duncan, they collected a melody for almost every single song in this book. So, these are songs that were collected in Scotland from mostly just local folks, people that just just townsfolk, old grandmothers and fishermen and whatnot. And some of their names are recorded in the book, but other times the name of the person was not recorded. So anyway, I started to peruse this book, and I looked in the section that was labeled, military songs or songs about soldiers and war. And so my process... Oh, sorry. Let me turn that piano down. My process essentially is I flip through the book, in the section that is relevant to what I'm looking for. And I look for titles that jump out at me. So I'm flipping through. I see a bunch of ones called the Bonnie Lass of Fivey, or Fivey, I don't know how to pronounce it. There's a whole collection of different settings of that. So flip, flip, flip. Some of these don't have music with them. And then I see this one that's called The Brisk Young Rover. And the subtitle is When I Was in My 18th Year. So right away, I'm attracted to the title. I'm attracted to the first line. And then I keep reading. When I was in my 18th year, I was a brisk young rover, and to the army I did go to range the world all over. So immediately it has this sense of promise, of adventure, of, wondering what's going to happen to this young lad, this, a bright future for this guy. And then the other thing that caught my attention was the chorus. And let me actually put this instrument down for a second. And so the chorus is nonsense syllables, which is always just delightful. So the chorus has fa la da da la. Let's see if I'm going to try to do it exactly the way it's written, which is not the way I ended up doing it on the album. But take a listen to this. Fa la da da la da da la da 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 fa la da da la da da oh. Right? So I'm just reading the music straight off the page without any decorations or changes. For those of you who know the way I recorded it, you'll notice that that's a little bit different from what I ended up with. And that's a topic I want to go into. But I figured that would have the bouncy, light, kind of jovial quality that I'm looking for to contrast with my slow, tragic laments on the album. So immediately I thought to myself, I can take what's on this page and dress it up, adapt it, arrange it into something that will catch the ear and will kind of be an earworm. So next I go through and I sing the melody of the whole piece just to see what that sounds like. So this skill, you do need to know how to read music. And so for those of you who are interested in potentially doing this kind of thing yourself, I highly recommend making sure that you're competent with singing simple melodies by sight, so based on the way that they're written on the staff. So I see here that there are two sharps, so I know that it's nominally going to be in the key of D major, and that means that D is Do, so it starts off on a re. So I think... And I don't have to sing it in actual D. I can sing it in whatever key I want as long as I have the relationships between the notes right. So I pick a scale, Do, Re, Mi, Fa, Sol, La, Ti, Do, Do. And then I start on Re. So it goes, when I was in my 18th year, I was a brisk young rover. And to the army I did go to range the world all over. And here's the chorus that we did a minute ago. Fa lal da da lal da da lal da day da fa la da day al da day oh. Right? So it's got a nice little bounce to it, a nice little lilt, and the melody is really simple and catchy, especially for that verse. So I'll sing it again a bit higher and a bit quicker so you can kind of get a sense for it. When I was in my 18th year, I was a brisk young rover, and to the army I did go to range the world all over. Fa-la-da-da-la-da-da-da-da-day, fa-la-da-day and a day-o. Right? So that's what's on the page. That's the raw, nucleus that we're going to work with. And so I want to show you how I developed that into the track that you hear on the album. So the first thing that I looked at was the lyrics. So putting aside the melody for the moment, I decided, and this is just an executive decision, I decided that brisk young rover is not a phrase that really has as much meaning for modern listeners, and I figured that the idea of that could be summarized by using the term bold young rover. And I believe in the index, actually, this piece was listed as brisk or bold young rover. So that might have been where I got that idea. So I decided to go with bold young rover. I think that conveyed the same idea and was a little bit clearer for modern listeners. And then what I did was I learned the melody from the page, and then I closed the book, and I try to let the melody percolate in my head and kind of take its own life. And so maybe some of the small details might change. And I consider that to be a good thing. That's part of this process. So what's literally on the page is, when I was in my 18th year, I was a brisk young rover, and to the army I did go to range the world all over. Now, that is not stylistically developed. It doesn't have any... Well, it actually does have one nice ornament that they did write in for you, but the rest of it is pretty plain. And when these kinds of songs are performed in reality, they're typically not performed in such a straight laced rhythm. So you're not really going to sit there and sing 4 quarter notes in a row. You're not going to go, I was in my 18th year. Maybe if it were a march. But so I let it percolate, and what started to happen was something like this. Let's see, what did I do? When I was in my 18th year, I was a bold young rover, and to the army I did go. So some of the melody notes are now not landing exactly on the downbeats, and then there's a couple of little ornaments that I'm adding in there, right? So for example, right there at the beginning, 1, 2, 3. When I was in my 18th year, I was a bold young rover. If you listen to the way that vocal relates to the clapping, it's not, I was in my 18th year. The syllables are not landing all exactly on the downbeats. Instead, some of them are on the ends of the beats, so some of them are anticipatory, some of them are delayed slightly. A great artist for listening to that kind of technique would be Andy Irvine. And all of the stuff that Planxty recorded, but in particular Andy, you'll hear the rock-solid rhythm of the mandolin or bouzouki or whatever instrument he's playing is like this perfect grid, and then the voice floats above it, not necessarily tied exactly to that grid. It's really neat. So I let the melody percolate, and what came out was slightly different than what's on the page, but it still has that signature. The pillars of the melody are the same. The da da dee da 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 dee da 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 dee da da dee la da dee da da dee da da dee ya dee da 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 da. Right, those pillars remain the same, and then the rest, I can vary the rhythm and add little ornamentation. Right, so that whole verse. When I was in my 18th year, I was a bold young rover, and to the army I did go, for to range the world all over. Something of that nature, right? And then I took a look at the chorus. Now, the chorus is where I made more changes, actually, because I felt like the notated chorus didn't have as much contour as I wanted it to have. It didn't have as much of a climax as I wanted. So the chorus they have here is fa-la-da-da-la-da-da-da-da-day-al, fa-la-da-day and the day-o. I'm messing up the syllables, but the melody is what matters here. And I sang that a few times, and I thought to myself, I want it to go higher in the first phrase so that the cascade down at the end is a little more interesting and dramatic. So instead of just going all day, all, I decided to go all day, all, right? So instead of going do, re, mi, re, I'm heightening it to do, re, mi, sol, mi, re, right? Notice when I'm altering the melody, I'm very much going to stick with the major pentatonic scale. And if you look at this piece in detail, you'll see that it's in D major, but the notes that it uses are D, E, F sharp, A, and B. That is actually it. There are no G's and there are no C sharps in this piece. So when you're altering melodies, take a look at the notes that are being used and try to understand what collection that those notes comprise, and then make sure you're sticking to that collection when you do alter the melody. So for example, an alteration that wouldn't sound as good would be if I had added in a fa. Take a listen to that. Fa-la-da-da, idle day, and a fa-la-da-da, and a day-o. Now, some of you are probably thinking, hey, that actually did sound pretty good. It did. It wasn't bad. It definitely has a different feel than the original, though. It's more harmonically specific, meaning that when you sing that fa, it really implies that the chord should change to a fa chord at that point of the song. That's not really the vibe of this original song. This original song is very free and open. Fa-la-da-da-la-da-da-da-da-day-o, fa-la-da-da-la-da-day-o. It all feels like it's one chord. So I didn't want to go with the fa, I wanted to go up to sol there. Fa-la-da-da-la-da-da-da-day and a fa. Right? So I go re, mi, re. Yeah, re, do, re, mi, sol instead of re, do, re, mi. It just gives it a little more of a climax, a little more contour. Right? And so after making those melodic changes, and, you know, some of those changes, like I said, happened just from the song bouncing around in my head. And some of them were more deliberate. I sat down and I said, I want to change this note. I don't like this note. So both of those are good processes to engage in. And then in terms of the lyrics, I wanted to simplify the... I already told you about the change with brisk to bold, and then I wanted to simplify the wording of that nonsense syllable chorus. So I kept most of it the same, but some of it's actually quite hard to read in this edition because it's handwritten. It looks like it's a facsimile of a handwritten thing. So I just simplified it. I did fa-la-da-da-la-diddle-diddle-day. I just went with diddle-diddle-day. And a fa-la-da-da and a day-o. It still has that same bounce, that same sort of structure, the back and forth. It has the same exact effect, and it's just a little bit easier to remember than they have fal al the doll, al the daddle, al the die-doll. Die-roll? I can't even tell what this is supposed to say. Is that an R? Die-roll? Day-roll? Fal al the die-roll, al the day-o. So, you know, and you have to understand that from singer to singer to singer, they would have done that part differently, every single singer, because, you know, that's not an essential the exact syllables are not essential, as you can probably imagine. So that's the kind of thing that you can take some license with. Now, you do have to be careful. You don't want to change too much about the song. Otherwise, then it might lose the character that attracted you to it in the first place, right? Now, it's not a copyrighted composition, so it's not as if there's any rules about not changing. I mean, you could change any and everything about this piece because it's not copyright protected. It's it's more than 100 years old. The composer is unknown. But I think there is something to be said for trying to retain the charm of the original. So I then looked through the verses. The first verse we already heard. When I was in my 18th year, I went to the army. I did go to range the world. The second verse I really liked too. I was a soldier stout and bold. I never once was wounded. Till I fell in love. Now, here, this is a little bit of Scots dialect. Till I fell in love, we a wheel-foured maid, and she has me deeply wounded. Now, the wheel-foured part, I'm pretty sure, is like well-favored, or good-looking, basically. And then, of course, the we is with. So I decided for this album, I didn't really want to go too heavily into the Scots wording. I wanted it to be a little bit more accessible. Also, I don't really have as much familiarity with that dialect as I would like. I have a little bit, but I really just wanted it to be something that was genuine and generic for me to be singing. So what I did was I just edited certain phrases like that. So instead of fell in love we a wheel forward maid, I said fell in love with a... What did I say? Let's see. I was a soldier stout and bold. I never once was wounded. Till I fell in love with the pretty fair maid, and she has... So I just used the phrase pretty fair maid, which of course is a very common phrase in Irish and Scottish songs. And it fits the rhythm. So when you're making these kinds of changes, you just have to listen to the rhythm and make sure you're using a phrase that has the same meaning and fits the rhythm. And she has me deeply wounded. I kept that phrase. That was kind of a nice bit of imagery. This guy who's never been wounded in battle, but his heart has been struck by this maiden. And then the next two verses describe... It says, one morning by the break of day, our drums did beat full order, our ship for Scotland back again to view that lowland border. And then it says, in Scotland there had we been 6 weeks in yon lowland border, till I fell in love we a wheel-forward maid to keep my house in order. Now, I feel like this is the same girl from earlier, and I feel like he's sort of reiterating that he falls in love with her. And so I felt like that was a bit superfluous. So, scandal of scandals, I actually took those two verses completely out because I felt like they didn't really advance the narrative. It's basically saying, oh, one day we sailed, we were ordered back to Scotland to check out the lowlands, and I fell in love with this girl again, or maybe I'm just telling you again that I fell in love with the girl. So I just felt like that was not super important for the narrative of the story. So I took that out completely. I just went right ahead to, she was her father's chief delight. So describing the girl, because the previous verse that I did keep talks about the girl, and then I thought it would be nice to go right into this description. She was her father's chief delight, a young maid, neat and bonny. Now, I said bright and bonny. I liked the alliteration of the two B's, and I feel like neat doesn't really have the same meaning in today's world. I courted her baith ere and late. I sort of modernized that to both early and late, with kisses sweet and many, right? Then going on, I gave to her a gay gold ring. It was a true love token. I kept that the same. And she gave me her right hand, that love ne'er be broken. Now, one thing you have to watch out for when you're adapting these songs, sometimes the rhythm of the notated music will fit the first verse quite well, and it will not fit the subsequent verses as well as you would hope. So, for example, I gave her a gay gold ring, it was for a true love token, And she gave me her right hand, that love ne'er be broken. There's just not enough syllables in some of those lines to really fit the full, florid, melody that we had decided on. So I just edited it slightly. There's a couple of connecting words that I add in there. I gave to her, so I gave to her instead of her. A gay gold ring, it was a true love token. Keep that mostly the same. She gave to me, again, to me instead of just me, her own right hand. And I said her own right hand to add a syllable there. Instead of her right hand, I said her own right hand. That our love, and then instead of that love ne'er be broken, that's not enough syllables. I said, that our love would ne'er be broken. That our love would ne'er be broken. That fits the pacing of that rhythm a little more, right? So it's just experimentation. It's just playing around with different wording and seeing what fits the rhythm. It's really not anything too crazy. It's something that I think we all have the ability to do. You just got to sit down and do it. In the next verse, one morning by the break of day, our drums did beat full order, our ship bound for the Indies. I said, in my version, I say, our ship was bound for the Indies, keeping it in the narrative voice. And leave this lowland border. Again, this is kind of an archaic way of phrasing it. I said, for to leave this lowland border. Again, it fits the rhythm a little better. Our ship was bound for the Indies, for to leave this lowland border. It's nice to have a couple of those bum bum bum, right? The short 2-syllable pickups, almost like 2/16 into a quarter, instead of always having and leave this lowland border. That's a little plain because it's only quarters and half notes, right? It gave to me a sad surprise. The tears fell down and blinded me. Now, some of the verbs in the notated edition are still in the present tense, which I believe is an archaism. It says, the tears fell down and blind me. Right? So you have fell, which is past, and then blind, which is present. I changed it to, the tears fell down and blinded me. Right? Our ship bound for the Indies, and leave my love behind me. So I changed that to, our ship was bound for the Indies, for to leave my love behind me. Just to make the grammar a little more contemporary sounding, right? And then we have, we sailed east, we sailed west, we sailed all around the borders, but the bonniest lass that I ever saw was down in yon lowland border. I kept that very close. I said, but the prettiest lass that I ever did see was the one on the lowland border. So just, again, editing the rhythm slightly. And then the last verse is very similar. It has the wheel forward maid, and of course I changed that to pretty little maid, the one I loved most dearly. So that's all we need to look at in the book. So once I had all of that set, so this is before I even touched the instrument, believe it or not. This is just, all of the work I just described to you is just sitting there with the book and just, humming or speaking or singing through the melody just without any accompaniment to see what sounds naturally the best just with the voice. Now, part 2 is adding. One morning by the break of day, our drums did beat full order. Our ship was bound for the Indies, for to leave this lowland border. It came to me a sad surprise. The tears